If I have to read the words undulating or tendril one more time, I might turn into a rabid ood. How much should we or can we adapt for a novelisation or just a film adaptation from the original source material? Planet of the Ood by Keith Temple is a prime example of something I believe hasn't done anything new. I made a video a few years ago about adaptations in Doctor Who, whether that be audio stories, film adaptations, novelisations, anything that adapts one Doctor Who story into another. And I queried that there is a fine line, obviously, between wholly changing a story or maintaining the original script, characters, dialogue to a T. Since then, I have read a handful of these novelisations, as you can see on my channel, and I think I've come to the conclusion that they need to do something new. By no means is Planet of the Ood a bad story. Keith Temple does a very decent job at translating a story that we are generally familiar with into written word. I mean, I'm not entirely sure why they chose Planet of the Ood. I'm not sure it's the most popular story, but here we are. It was released alongside a handful of other stories, that being the Zygon Invasion, which adapts both the Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion, The Waters of Mars, Kablam, and Warrior's Gate and Beyond, which adapts which adds it adapts the Warrior's Gate and adapts the audio story called the Kairos Ring. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. And then also has an original story in it, which is pretty cool. I think maybe like a lot of novelizations should do that. Have like extra little stories that relate to the novelisation that you're already doing. Warrior's Gate, I believe, was already novelised, so this new novelisation that they released alongside Planet of the Ood was kind of a reproduction of an already established novelisation, which in of itself quite weird. I believe those novelisations were the last kind of Target style novelisations before they moved into the Ncuti Gatwa stuff, so they turned blue. So these were the last ones, like the cream coloured ones. I mean, there might have been a few more. Obviously, I know there was like Evil of the Daleks and stuff, but I don't believe there was any Target style novelizations since 13th of July 2023. But either way, Planet of the Ood, again, like I said, not sure why it was chosen, but it's fine. I think unfortunately I already went into this story with quite low thoughts about it. It's not a story that I'm necessarily too fussed about. The episode itself I think is quite skippable, but it didn't help that the previous story, The Fires of Pompeii, I was also not too happy with how they adapted that either. Keith Temple didn't really add a lot. The most he added was a prologue, so spoilers obviously for the novelisation, but the prologue that gets added follows two Ood, Delta 50 and Kappa 300, who are both Ood that we do see in the episode, like unnamed, but the Ood that the Doctor and Donna come across in the snow, I believe that's Delta 50, who is in this prologue kind of staring out at the planet. And then Kappa 300, I believe, is the Ood that is one of the Ood anyway that is rabid, and they're kind of chasing it throughout the complex. That is, I think, the one that gets chained up as well. I think that's the same one. It kind of they have like a moment between each other. I think the only other main addition, aside from like a random character getting a few more lines, is an addition later on towards the end in Ood conversion. And don't get me wrong, this one was quite like a unfun section, I suppose you could say. It talks about the removal of the Ood hindbrain, which was really interesting. It has like Ood strapped to like conveyor belts with like little instruments snipping off their hindbrain essentially and attaching the translator ball, which was quite disgusting, and the Doctor and Donna used these translator balls to blow up Ood conversion. It was a kind of an unnecessary addition, which is like why I'm not too fussed about the addition. Like, it was quite sad, this addition, but it was an unnecessary addition, which I think there was very limited additions, but any deviations whatsoever, however minor, were just that, very, very minor. I felt like Keith Temple could have expanded on so much more. It just simply lacks what I think novelizations should do. I think novelizations should add detail. I don't envy the writers who have to novelize these stories, balancing new ideas and staying true to the original stories, but I think that's the thing. I wouldn't say there's anything new here. Same goes for the fires of Pompeii. Think about how little Ood Sigma is focused on throughout the televised episode, and how he's been microdosing Halpern over the years to turn him into an Ood. It's a really interesting plot point that they did not have time to really go over deeply in the episode. This is the perfect place to do that. I would love to see, I think Ood Sigma is the prime character in this novelisation to expand upon. He's such an interesting character who crops up a couple more times, but we don't know anything about him. Yes, he's quite mysterious in that way, but the main thing I would have loved to see is his perspective, Ood Sigma's perspective, from someone who's been at the right hand side of a terrible person for so many years, and is also at the center of this kind of revolution of the Ood, basically. When seeing the Ood locked up in the cell in the episode and in the novelisation, all we get is maybe like a glance from Ood Sigma looking at the Ood. Why not have even just a paragraph about how Ood Sigma feels and how he doesn't understand why he's feeling what he's feeling, what that means for him and his battle because he's still been converted. There's still probably parts of him who are trying to serve because the circle has not yet been broken. He's the one Ood who has this ability that, once broken, kind of slightly broken out of the conversion, the mind games that they're playing with the Ood. He's the one Ood that is taking it slow and taking it carefully and considering every move. And I would have loved to hear, even if a whole chapter even would have been interesting about Ood Sigma. Why not have that be the prologue? That would be so interesting to see how he sees himself, sees humans, and sees the Ood. I wouldn't even say it ruins the final reveal of what he's been doing to Halpern over these years. I think if anything it adds to it. If anything, it's some nice foreshadowing, and it would have been just nice to see. If I wanted to experience this story, I would watch the episode. If it's the same thing written down, it will take me much longer. I'm not going to read it. If I don't get anything new from this, I'm not going to want to read it. I would want to read... Sorry, I say want to read it. Obviously, I don't know until I read it. But I wouldn't want to read it again. So far, Dalek is probably the only one I'd want to read again. And maybe The Christmas Invasion, which I didn't make a video about, but I think they're the only two so far that I'd want to read again. Although I don't actually remember if The Christmas Invasion is as good as I think it was. I think another character that could have done with some expansion upon was Solana, the kind of the sales representative, I think she was. It would have been interesting to see her perspective of the conflict between humans and Ood. You can see that she struggles a lot with working with Halpern and Ryder and how they do their business, and she clearly cares. I mean, in the episode, I think she kills or tells them to kill the Ood, but they took that out here and made her seem a bit more nice. The moments before her death, she does regret not going with the Doctor and Donna, but I have no reason to care. I don't know anything about this person. She seems nice, but I want to see her perspective and explore her emotions. You don't even necessarily have to add plot points to this. You could just have descriptions and ideas that float around in their brain and talk about this character without having them doing anything. You don't have to have plot happening all the time. The unintended benefit of classic Who novelisations is that the writers didn't have, for the most part, I believe, any visual material to go off of. Doctor Who DVDs and VHSs weren't released for quite a while for many stories, so they had shooting scripts to go off of, notes, other people's kind of testimonies and their own memories to go off of if they were the one who wrote the script in the first place or were involved with the story. Because of that, they can reintroduce ideas from previous scripts, a lot like how Robert Shearman introduced ideas from Jubilee into the televised story, but then introduced more into the novelised story and expanded upon just everything, literally every character in that story, more or less. And that's why so many classic Who novelisations can differ massively. Whether you like that or not is completely up to you. But certain things like the Daleks novelisation changes the introduction of Ian and Barbara from school teachers who knew each other to random people on the street who basically bump into the TARDIS and don't know each other at all. It kind of leads you to think that the Daleks could have been the first story. So if you read An Unearthly Child novelisation and then read the Daleks novelisation, which I think I did, it doesn't flow. Like, it actually doesn't make any sense because you get two different introductions of these characters. It's very similar to the Peter Cushing film of that episode, the Daleks episode. I'm assuming that a lot of these new Who novelisations were written with the broadcast episode in mind or in front of them while they were writing. I don't know, like, people write differently. Yeah, of course, like, I would probably do the same. But I think it would make for a more interesting story if you just kind of go off of ideas and the characters and the overall plot instead of specifically what happened, when happened, at the same time, certain things happening, dialogue happening exactly the same. I think dialogue especially, you don't necessarily have to include the same dialogue. Obviously the iconic lines and stuff like that people remember is fair enough, but you don't have to copy the same lines from the episode. I think unfortunately it basically ends up dumbing down the book and creates a piece of media that has almost no originality whatsoever. I'm just quite disappointed, 2 in a row that are almost just me rewatching the episode, but instead of spending 45 minutes, I'm spending hours reading the book because I'm a very slow reader. Unfortunately, the Planet of the Ood novelisation by Keith Temple will get a 3.5 out of 10. The next one is a very popular story. It's of course The Waters of Mars by Phil Ford, released on the same day as The Planet of the Ood, so hopefully this one can live up to its TV counterpart.